Hey, good evening, folks. I kind of figured this would be the next movie review podcast I would do since I didn't have time to go see X-Men Apocalypse, and I had my eyes on this particular film for a couple of months now, for better or worse. It's a 2016 reboot of the 1984 horror comedy classic Ghostbusters, but instead of an all-male cast, they're doing a 180. Making all the Ghostbusters female, starring Kristen Wiig, Melissa McCarthy, Kate McKinnon, and Leslie Jones. And I wanted to start there with you guys. And joining me, I have Ted from BrainScratch Commentaries.
Yo.
Derrick from GameXplain. Thanks for joining me, guys.
No problem.
Now, when this movie was announced, were you at all familiar with any of these actresses? I mean, I'm pretty sure it's a safe assumption you guys knew who Chris Hemsworth was.
He's my favorite actress.
Just Melissa McCarthy. I knew Paul Feig from Bridesmaids, which was an okay movie, but it had some issues. All I really knew is that the rest of the actresses were like from Saturday Night Live. But I wasn't too familiar with most of the rest of the cast, other than Melissa McCarthy, who's probably easily the most famous out of everybody there. So I was actually really surprised when I watched the movie, and she wasn't really the main character.
I only knew Melissa McCarthy from this one Identity Thief, which I'm not proud to say I saw in theaters.
Oh, why?
I was with my college friends in West PA at the time. It was a joyous time. Someone was getting married. We had time to kill. We went to a movie theater, and Identity was the only thing playing because we didn't feel like sitting through Oz, I think, was the one with James Franco.
Oh, jeez, I'm not sure which would have been worse in that case. Because I saw Oz, and that was terrible.
So yeah, the idea of an all-female Ghostbusters movie, when that was announced, I thought, okay, let's see where this goes.
It ruined Ghostbusters, John.
You're right. It did ruin Ghostbusters. What am I saying?
I went to the movie and I came back. My copy of the original Ghostbusters was broken into a pile of tiny bits. So
the little ghost in the emblem was shedding a tear.
I didn't even know that was possible. I have the digital version.
No, your entire computer is broken into tiny bits.
Oh, shit.
Seriously, though, the people who are just hating on the movie because all of the Ghostbusters are women now are incredibly obvious to spot and not worth your attention. With that said, I do understand why reasonable people were concerned, because the trailer was pretty bad.
The first trailer did not convince me in the slightest.
No.
It kind of reminded me of, I remember when they were announcing the new Vacation movie, which apparently wasn't a reboot. It was more like a continuation, only instead of like Clark Griswold, it's his son Rusty. And I remember watching the trailer for that. I was like, I'll watch it because, I love the vacation movies. I love National Lampoon's Vacation. I love Christmas Vacation. I saw the trailer and I was like, these jokes are not hitting anything with me, red band or not. And I got a similar feeling with this first Ghostbusters trailer, and I thought, I mean, to be fair, that's really nothing new for comedy trailers, because comedy movies are always going to be a heavily subjective discussion on whether or not you find this or that funny. And for the style of humor I'm expecting from Ghostbusters, it didn't hit any marks. And yeah, I did compare it to the 1984 film because I feel that's what you pretty much have to compare it to.
That's your point of reference.
That's your point of reference. That's what you're rebooting from. And if I were to compare that sort of humor from what I saw, what I'm familiar with, what I've grew up with, no, it didn't hit the mark.
It was very slapsticky. Like, to start off immediately with, like, okay, here's a vomit joke. Okay, here's a, like, loud black woman. Those type of jokes. It's like, guys, I mean, I got a small chuckle at a few things, but nothing was really hitting for me. It was just sort of like, okay, I'm still gonna give this a shot because I'm intrigued and I don't mind the all-female cast. I was aware of Kristen Wiig beforehand, never heard of Kate McKinnon or Leslie Jones, but you know what? I'll give it a shot, because the one thing I do know from Paul Feig and his previous movies is that his trailers are always bad. And that was sort of the hope I was holding on to. Is like, okay, his trailers usually suck, but the movies are typically pretty good at the very least. So hopefully that'll be the case with this one too. And that's
at least the man's consistent.
Yeah.
But I will say that at the very least, the trailer was somewhat indicative of the type of movie that Ghostbusters 2016 was supposed to be. Because in terms of humor, this is not very similar to the original Ghostbusters at all. It's not nearly as dry, or I'd say the writing isn't as sharp either. It relies a lot more on stuff like slapstick and a lot more sex jokes and things like that. But with that said, I still thought it was a good movie. Like, not... okay, well, who here thought it was better than the original Ghostbusters? I'm expecting no one. Okay, who here thought it was better than Ghostbusters 2? Because I certainly did. Not that that's hard, because Ghostbusters 2 sucks, but...
It's been a while since I've seen Ghostbusters 2, but I'd say, yeah, it's probably better.
I will say both movies are better than this reboot.
Really?
Yeah.
You think this is better than Ghostbusters 2? Do you think Ghostbusters 2 is better?
I think Ghostbusters 2 is a better film, yeah. I will admit that a part of that is nostalgia. I just can't deny that. There's no way in hell I can't deny that, because I grew up with both of those films. I love the original 1984 film, and I love Ghostbusters 2, despite the fact that I hate the setup of Ghostbusters 2. Like, the whole reasoning for that movie's existence I hate, but when you get past that, I think it's a decent enough follow-up. So I went to go see this this past Friday. I went to go see it with my mom, actually, because she's had interest in the Ghostbusters reboot, because she's actually the one, along with my uncle and my grandpa, that got me into Ghostbusters. Because back in the early 90s, there was this cable service that wasn't Comcast or anything of the sort. It was called Pop Vision. May you never experience it. You don't have to experience it, because now you have DirecTV and Dish and Verizon and all that, but it was very limited. But whenever we had a movie on, we'd sit our ass down and watch it, because that's probably all we were going to get before Skinamax took over at around 9 p.m. And Ghostbusters was often the subject of viewing on those Friday, Saturday nights, and I just fell in love with them. I loved the style of... Back then I loved because, oh, look at the ghosts, look at Slimer and all that, but as I got older, it was like, I just click with all these people. I really do. I love the style of writing. I love the style of humor. And when I went to go see this on Friday with my mom, she was having the time of her life. She loved the movie, and I'm glad she did. I'm glad she was having a good time. But I was paying attention to the type of jokes. I was paying attention to my behavior. I was like, I really wish I saw this by myself, because I really don't want to be that person for my mom, like the guy that's not laughing at what she's laughing at, because I don't want to be the killjoy, I'm not laughing at what she's laughing, and I know I'm not. But unfortunately, I can't force myself to laugh at something I don't find funny. Now, not to say that I thought this movie struck out completely. I had moments in this film, but that's all they were for me, moments. To perfectly sum up my thoughts real quickly, I thought the movie was okay. Not terrible, but all right. And in a comedy, that's often as low as I can go, because the point of a good comedy is to laugh. And I didn't really laugh out loud in this film.
Well, I kind of had somewhat of the opposite experience. Like, I didn't have any points where was, like, rolling on the floor laughing, ruffling, as the kids say.
Rafflecopters.
I found myself chuckling throughout most of the movie. Now, granted, there were a lot of jokes that just straight up did not land for me. And, oddly enough, most of them were in the trailer. Like, I didn't really find the scene where they shoot the ghost in the dick all that funny. I didn't find the vomit thing funny, all that. But I really enjoyed, especially most of the character-centric humor in this movie. Like, I think that all four main characters are very strong characters. Now, I don't necessarily believe that they'll end up being as iconic as the original four Ghostbusters. That's kind of a tall order, but particularly Kristen Wiig's character, Erin, I think her name was, and Kate McKinnon's character, Holtzman, were, I think, really, really great to watch. I loved whenever those guys were on screen, and mostly when they were just shooting the shit together is when I was having the most fun with this movie.
Shooting the shit was actually my favorite moments of this film, when they were just talking with one another. And honestly, the best parts of this film is when they were up-and-coming Ghostbusters. Not so much with the flashy action sequences, which we can talk about later, but like when they're in the subway for the first time and they're testing out the new proton streamer equipment, where it wasn't even a backpack, it was more like something you had to push on a cart. And they're dealing with the ghost for the first time, and nobody knows what the hell they're doing. I loved that stuff. That's the bumbling Ghostbuster I know. I was hoping the entire film would be like that. They're in over their head with what they're doing, but they're gonna make it work because they're the Ghostbusters.
Yeah, I was actually surprised that, like, there's the one scene. I don't want to spoil too many of the jokes for the movie, because then if you spoil all the jokes, there's literally zero reason to go see a comedy. But one scene that I think would have been, if they had to put a sex joke into the trailers, the scene where they turn on the proton stream and then it kind of like goes like doop and kind of like fizzles out, and that was disappointing. I thought that would have been a much better one than just like shooting the ghost in the dick, because it's like, oh, we shot him in the dick. That's really funny. Yeah. Whatever.
But then everybody would probably just turn that joke in on its head amidst all the controversy and say, well, that's disappointing. Yeah, like this movie, am I right? Yeah, then they just do that over and over again. And then
where I stand on the movie is I thought it was pretty good. I have issues with it, but I think overall I still had a good time watching this. I got some genuine laughs out of quite a few moments. And the thing I sort of came back to when I was looking at because when I first started watching the movie, I'm like, oh boy, this is not good. I think we're in kind of for a rough time, because none of the jokes were landing for me in the beginning. It kind of had that proper opening like you'd expect out of a Ghostbusters that kind of worked, and then nothing. It was like sort of like just jokes that weren't really doing anything for me. And then as soon as they finished up that encounter with the very first ghost, all of a sudden things started clicking into place. Like they started getting moving. They started getting the whole Ghostbusters, everything else set up. Chris Hemsworth was introduced when he is freaking hilarious in this.
Chris Hemsworth is the star of the show, I think, personally.
He has some of the best jokes, I will say, and all of them at his expense. And you can just tell he relishes it. It is wonderful. But yeah, I think one of the issues is and I'm going to make a comparison. The original Ghostbusters got to the point right away. They were introduced. They were fired. They started trying to do the whole Ghostbusters thing within, first 10 minutes? And I think it was like 15 to 20 before they actually did that sort of thing in this movie. They were worried a little bit too much about having Kristen Wiig sort of resist it and then get into that again. And it kind of slowed the pace a little too much.
I didn't care about anything regarding her college, because at the end of the day, you know she's not going to get the tenure, because otherwise she doesn't become a Ghostbuster. You know that going into the movie. So why do we want to watch her be at this college where we know she's going to leave right away? I mean, granted, it does set up some character interactions between her and Melissa McCarthy's character, but it just felt like it was the weakest part of the movie to me. And I agree with you, though. Once they got out of the college kind of stuff and started going on their own, well, even once Kristen Wiig gets fired, I think things pick up, because I love the scene with the dean in Melissa McCarthy's college. That's amazing. But it's weird to me that this movie has a better second act than a first or third act, because most movies is where the second act kind of drags. Like, I know it's not a comedy, but the Avengers, the second act is the weakest part of that movie. Actually, a lot of Marvel movies, the second act is the weakest part of their movie. So the fact that their second act, where the characters are just given time to grow, is the best part is unusual to me, given my movie-going experiences.
I think it goes without saying with a Ghostbusters-centric movie where that's the reason why you watch it. It's ironically the best part to me about Ghostbusters is not so much of them busting ghosts, but just watching them shoot the shit, interact with each other, comment on their surroundings, react to everything.
Exactly. So that whole scene with them going after the rock concert ghost, that's brilliant almost the entire way through. I like Leslie Jones and finding that room and like seeing all the mummies is like no. This is not the right place. I gotta get out of here. And of course, they immediately start haunting that area. And it's like, it was legitimately funny. I enjoyed that sequence the entire way through.
Yeah, there are a handful of slapsticky type action CG shots in the final third that land. Like, I like how they used Slimer in the last act. I think that was actually really good. But in terms of action slapsticky type scenes, I think that the middle scene with the rock concert lands most of them very well. I think it was a very strong introduction to the Ghostbusters as Ghostbusters instead of just scientists who study ghosts. So
it was their take on the hotel scene from the original film. Instead of a hotel, it's a rock concert, which gets like this movie is trying to bring more energy to today's culture than what the '84 film did, and I noticed that not only with the settings but also just characterizations of these Ghostbusters, because they seem to do everything in their power to make sure none of these girls are just female versions of Egon, Ray.
Which I'm glad. I'm glad for that.
You know what? I'm glad about that too. I wouldn't just want carbon copies. Because if you're gonna do that, then what's the point? Did the personalities click with you guys? I mean, were you okay with like the female Egon being nuts essentially?
Well, let's be real though. It's a different take on the kind of eccentric personality that would make this kind of shit. Because you've got Egon, who you can believe makes like proton packs and stuff, but that's because he's a very reserved person who has nothing to do but his science. And then you've got someone like Holtzman, Kate McKinnon's character, who uses this as an outlet for just how it's a different kind of nuts, basically. And I think it worked. Personally, since Kate McKinnon, I think, is the strongest character in the film as well. So, there's that. The only character that didn't click with me was Melissa McCarthy's character. And she had a couple of funny jokes, which I'm glad for. I didn't really click with her. She was really the only one out of the main 4 Ghostbusters that I didn't find myself rooting for 100% of the time.
She was sort of if you have to force an analog, she would be the Dan Aykroyd of the group. And I think she works for that. She's definitely the most interested, but she's also kind of the most, she serves well as that bridge between Kristen Wiig's sort of very reserved personality and Kate McKinnon's very crazy personality. And she works in that way. And you totally buy why she's in the Ghost, how she's in the Ghost, and everything else. She just didn't have the most jokes, which is fine. And I really do like her. What is it, the wonton jokes? When she's trying to order food, at first I wasn't so sure about it, but then, especially that last time they used the joke, it just landed pretty well for me. I was like, you know what? She didn't have this laugh out loud moments, but to be fair, not all the original Ghostbusters had all those moments as well. They had to have that sort of straight man to play off of in many cases. And the one I appreciate the most out of all of them probably is Leslie Jones, because never heard of her. Seeing her in the trailers, she is the one you're most worried about because she's doing it. The trailers make it look like, oh God, she's going to be this sassy black woman the entire time, which is not a terrible trope. It can work, but it's also kind of tired. And to see her say you guys are science smart, I'm street smart, and oh gosh, this is going to go poorly. But she took a character that could be very easy to just make a caricature and really did something with her. And I like how her street smarts isn't I'm street. It's no, I know this city. I know the history of each of these buildings and why they're important to New York. And I like that that made her very unique. To me, she's a lot stronger of a character than Winston ever was, as much as I love Winston.
She has more to do than Winston, I think, is the big thing. Because Winston is literally just hired in the middle of the movie just to have another Ghostbuster, and he's not given an awful lot to do. One thing that I actually kind of really liked about this movie is that a lot of the side characters are given very funny bits. Even characters that are only there for a scene or two, like the mayor and the mayor's assistant, the guy who draws the Ghostbusters icon in the subway. It's just interesting to me the way that the movie does humor, because Ghostbusters I don't think was ever really a laugh-out-loud funny movie. And I'm not trying to say that in a bad way, because it's not really trying to be that kind of humor. It's trying to be a very kind of intellectual, tongue-in-cheek kind of humor, which is great. It's an amazing movie that way. This movie was trying to go for a more kind of, I guess, traditional style of comedy, which I guess makes it stand out more when the jokes don't laugh and you're just chuckling or not laughing at all. It feels a little bit more awkward in that
Unfortunately,
case.
that was the case with me. I was chuckling, didn't really burst out loud. Well, no, with comedy movies, I don't tend to burst out loud because you get that feeling that it might be embarrassing or something like that.
I don't care about that.
I did. I'm on and off about that sort of thing. It really depends on just how funny the joke is, and unfortunately, given the different approach to comedy they did this time, where you said it yourself, Ted, where the original Ghostbusters was more dry, this feels a little more cartoonish.
It's farcical, I would even go to say.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it, because there were a few characters that I wasn't sure how to get at first. And you guys mentioned Chris Hemsworth, and I don't know if for the first 5 to 10 minutes I'm trying to get a ring on this guy. It's who is this person supposed to be? Is he the Ann Potts character? Is he a combination of Ann Potts and Rick Moranis? Because Rick Moranis in his role, he was the the loser. He was like a nerd who invites clients over to parties so that he can write them off as tax deductible. But he just like, this guy feels like he belongs in another movie, like in a Zoolander type of movie. And then there was the mayor and there was his assistant who I get they were playing off, but even they felt a little over the top.
I liked all those characters though, because honestly, it is a very over the top movie, and it kind of, the things that make it, I think it makes these other characters are more over the top because they're more one-dimensional, because they have to be more one-dimensional because they're not the Ghostbusters. They're not the ones that we're seeing grow throughout the course of the movie. But I feel like their dialogue humor is over the top in the way that the special effects humor for the Ghostbusters is over the top. You know, so I never really felt like Chris Hemsworth didn't belong in the movie. I always felt like his interactions with the other characters were really great, I thought, personally.
Were you like that the entire movie, Johnny, where each time like a new character was introduced and you were trying to get a read on it, were you immediately trying to compare it to the original film, or were you going into this sort of like, I'm going to just see what this is as its own thing?
I'd be lying if I said I wasn't trying to compare it to the 84 film, because that's just an inevitability on my part. I mean, whether or not you're rebooting it or remaking it, I'm going to compare it to your point of reference on what you're going to be doing for writing. And yeah, I did do that with the Chris Hemsworth character. I'm wondering, okay, just because I see trailers and I'm thinking,
yeah, you immediately think it's the male Andy Potts, and he's definitely not.
He's definitely not. But at the same time, I don't know what he's supposed to be.
He's dumb. He is very, very dumb.
I don't know how the hell he gets that job in the first place. He can't even use
because there's literally no other applicants. That's
why. Kristen Wiig kind of has the hots for him.
They don't really do anything with that though. They don't.
I honestly, I prefer them not doing anything with it than shoehorning in an unnecessary romance angle. Personally,
I wouldn't want to see those two get together anyway. So,
Chris Hemsworth belongs to me.
Yeah, Chris Hemsworth is my waifu.
I seriously love his introduction though, and all of his jokes, and when they were talking about like going to talk amongst themselves, and they told him to, step away, and his visual gags there. I mean, I did really enjoy it, but I think also as like I think I very quickly got into a different headspace, because I was comparing the two back and forth, and I still would every so often, like when it brought attention to something, that's when I started comparing. But when it, like in the case of Chris Hemsworth character, I thought, okay, this is I thought that for the trailer, but in the movie, for some reason it didn't click with me that that's exactly what they were going for, and I think I was able to enjoy him on his own. And but I totally understand wanting to compare and needing to, like, not even needing, but just wanting to see how it changed, because this is a reboot.
Yeah, and the movie sporadically, I wouldn't say sporadically, I would say pretty frequently, kept reminding me of the 84 film.
And I think that's also one of its biggest weaknesses.
The introduction, while not a library, was a historical landmark and a tourist attraction. And I'm setting up, I was like, I know exactly how this is going to work out. And I was expecting, it was like, if it leads into like the guy getting scared out of his mind with the Ghostbusters theme playing out, then I think I know what I'm going to expect with the rest of this film. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. I mean, it's good to hear the original Ray Parker theme again.
Oh, well, because it's a million times better than the Fall Out Boy remix, which is awful.
Can we not talk about the Fall Out Boy?
Oh, God. I think people's expectations are going to be the biggest barrier to entry. The people who have decided that they're not going to like this movie have already decided that they're not going to like this movie. But assuming you're a reasonable person and you want to enjoy this movie, I would say that don't expect a type of humor like the original Ghostbusters. I mean, I think, Derrick, you're right in that the callbacks sometimes were distracting, like the cameos in particular. Well, actually, I'm okay with most of them. The only ones that really nailed home for me were Ernie Hudson and Dan Aykroyd's. I think those two were the best. Bill Murray's was the weakest, oddly enough, to me.
I would say so, yeah.
Yeah, Bill Murray's was definitely the weakest, although I did enjoy his death, so...
I thought that scene was completely unnecessary.
It was completely unnecessary.
The Bill Murray cameo would have been fine just in that news report, but they, for some reason, needed to have an extra scene with him where he comes to the Ghostbuster HQ to try and debunk it, and then they end up killing him off. And I'm not so much angry about that. I'm more angry about what did this fulfill Nothing.
I don't think it progressed the story in any way, actually.
No, actually, I would argue that it does, because it actually shows how far Kristen Wiig's character wanted to go in order to like get the recognition. That was the point of that scene to me, is like you really saw like she needed this guy's approval. She needed people's approval, that she wasn't nuts for believing in ghosts because of the backstory they gave her, which was also one of the stronger moments. So I'd actually argue that the Bill Murray scene, while not especially funny or anything like that, did provide character development for her character.
I thought they would have already gotten enough with that with the YouTube comments.
That's a tell don't show kind of thing. This is a show don't tell, where you're not specifically told she releases the ghost because she wants attention from Bill Murray. It's you realize, oh, she's going to go that far to do that, just to get attention. So I agree with you, Derrick, in that it does serve that purpose, but I also feel like they could have done that in a better way.
True.
As well.
I won't argue that point, but I do think that that's what they were going for with that scene.
Did you guys catch the Harold Ramis cameo?
Yeah.
Yes, I did.
Reference.
Yeah, that was sweet. I think that was the perfect way to honor him. And that he also got a for Harold Ramis thing at the end of the credits. But I think the bust was a tasteful and pleasant way to commemorate him.
I smiled, and it made my mom well up.
Oh, I
She
bet.
absolutely loved Harold Ramis.
I bet. I will say the most surprising cameo was Sigourney Weaver, but I also think she was probably the weakest cameo as well. She didn't really add much.
It felt like an afterthought, and it was, because post credits.
Yeah, that's true.
I'm just surprised that they got every major actor from the original movie, aside from
Rick
Moranis, who obviously just doesn't do movies anymore.
Well, he's retired from acting, so.
Yeah, so, there's, like, you can't get somebody who's not working, but, like, they got everybody else, too, so I was surprised by that, and pleased, too.
There were some moments where their callbacks kind of worked, and other moments where the callbacks just fell completely flat. And I think that was probably one of the weaker moments. It was like when they were really trying to compare themselves to the original. I think that's when it was at its weakness, because even though the plot structure is sort of similar to the original movie, it's still very much its own thing, which I appreciated. And I think stuff like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man, the way he returned, was well done. That was probably one of the better callbacks. Slimer is definitely one of the better callbacks.
I love Slimer in this movie because they don't use him in the way you would expect him to be used. So it was really just kind of the fact that you could tell that they were setting things up to be similar to the original, while still being like, oh, the things at the underneath the building instead of on top of the building, all of the ghosts are released because this reason, which, I mean, the reasons why the ghosts are all released is different than the original movie, but it still ends up with, you got this ending where there's a whole bunch of ghosts wandering around, so functionally it feels the same. I actually did not mind that they had the protonic reversal was the way that they undid everything. Like, I expected that, although I was surprised that they didn't do a direct cross the streams reference in that case.
If they brought mention to that at that point of the movie, considering how many times they crossed the streams earlier in the movie, I'd be pissed.
That is true.
But they didn't do that, probably because they probably didn't want to do that.
In terms of callbacks / cameos, did you see the post-credit sequence? Oh, spoilers, by the way.
A little late now. That there's a big-ass spoiler-heavy thing on this title, so...
Okay, did you see the post-credit scene, John?
No, I did not.
Okay, well, at the end of the credits, if you stay all the way through, Leslie Jones is listening to, like, some kind of...
One of those tapes where they did the fart joke before.
Oh, okay.
She's listening to one of those devices. She takes off her headphones and asks, have any of you guys heard of Zool? So, obviously, they're setting themselves up for a sequel because I think... a sequel, I think, is actually relatively possible because there's no way this movie didn't make money.
It was in second place this weekend. It lost to Secret Life of Pets.
See, that's actually not too surprising because Secret Life of Pets was a surprise success. It made way more than they thought it would, and after that, people sort of expected Ghostbusters to be number 2. What matters most is how much it made at number 2, I think.
With it being like a huge headline story for months and months and months, because remember, there is no such thing as bad press. I think a sequel is likely, not guaranteed, but likely. How would you feel about them bringing back Gozer and Zool and all that for a sequel? because my big thing is that it's going to be the same characters, possibly, but the structure of the movie would have to be completely different, I hope, because then we're just going to get Ghostbusters 2 again, and I would really rather not get Ghostbusters 2 again, personally.
That's really weird if they would bring back Gozer and Zool for the second film, because you would have to do something completely different. Otherwise, you risk remaking the first film again.
I really hope that they don't, that if they were to do Gozer and Zool, they're just the villains and not... Like, they're not like, oh, the Ghostbusters are back to zero again, because that would be a little...
They kind of already... the thing is, they better set themselves up for that, where some people believe them, but not everybody. So I think they're in a better spot now to do a sequel than the original Ghostbusters, or at least with the plot they went with Ghostbusters 2. But I think that makes me... I actually would be more interested in a sequel, because they're set up now. They have all the building blocks out of the way. They can just sort of cut loose and maybe try to obtain the dry humor or try to do their own thing and have to come up with a completely different plot surrounding Zool and Gozer.
Personally, I would like them to stick to the type of humor that they have, because the only other Paul Feig movie that I know I've watched is Bridesmaids. Having seen that and this, I think this is a better movie than Bridesmaids. I don't know how well that this cast and this director can pull off the more dry style of writing from Ghostbusters, like the original Ghostbusters. Not to mention that it would feel very dissonant considering the type of movie this was.
True.
So I would just like this style to be refined, personally.
That's where I'm sort of at a crossroads here too, because I realize that given if this film is ever going to get a sequel, and it most likely will, I can't expect them to have a complete tonal shift in comedy, because like you just said, it would fly in the face of what they set up in the first film, and which doesn't bode well for me in future movies. I mean, maybe maybe I can laugh at it for different reasons, or because again, this type of Ghostbusters 2016 type of comedy is just not my type of comedy. It just in general, and from what I expect from the Ghostbusters franchise. But that's not so much of the movie's fault, to be fair. That's just my expectations, and probably expecting something a little different. What
did you guys think of the villain for this movie?
I thought until he became a ghost, he was the weakest part of the movie by far. He's given a very shallow motivation, and that would be fine if he was an entertaining presence on screen, but he's not until he becomes a ghost. And part of that's because once he becomes a ghost, he possesses Chris Hemsworth, and Chris Hemsworth is a much funnier actor than you would expect. But like he just felt very generic until he was given the chance to cut loose with like ghost powers and things like that.
I didn't really think anything of this guy, if only because I was confused of whether or not he was the head honcho or he was an underling to a higher power. And yeah, he was just working on his own thing, and that was the thing. And suddenly he kills himself, gets these mystical powers, and transforms into the Ghostbuster symbol.
Yeah. That actually I thought was the setup for the Ghostbusters, like him turning into the Ghostbuster symbol, I actually thought was kind of funny, because I expected him to be Stay Puft instead. So I thought
it's A or B about it. It's that movie Stay Puft.
Yeah, basically. But like the choose your form scene, which again, a callback to the original movie, I actually thought was pretty funny, because they it was something. The line that Leslie Nielsen said was in character for her, and then he became like an animated Ghostbuster symbol. Wait,
Leslie Jones.
Did I call her Leslie Nielsen?
You said
yes.
Leslie Nielsen. I thought this movie was off.
Yeah.
It's like, how you have an all-female Ghostbusters and Leslie Nielsen in drag? I don't think that's the same thing.
It wouldn't be out of character for the Naked Gun movies, though.
Yeah, don't call her don't call her Shirley.
But I'd agree, Ted. That was a relative... They did a nice, well enough twist on that whole scene that it worked out. But I'm pretty much in agreement with you guys. Until he possessed Chris Hemsworth, there really wasn't too much to him, and it kind of made sense because it was this guy finally like unleashing his id through Chris Hemsworth, and it was kind of funny. And I will say that that they have that dance sequence that plays when he possesses all the takes control of all the cops and military and all that, and they have him dancing through the credits, and that scene was supposed to be in the movie, but they cut it out because it got leaked, and all the fans were like, no, this sounds stupid, so they didn't have confidence in it. And I'm looking at this scene in the credits, I'm like, Man, knowing how much I like Chris Hemsworth, knowing how much fun he's having, I really wish this scene was in the movie.
Me too. I as long as they didn't like make it Spider-Man 3 levels long, because like Spider-Man 3's dance sequence is like 5 minutes.
Oh no, keep it a short minute. You're good.
Like I'd say even like a good 30 seconds is all you need, because it just goes to show how much of how addicted to his power this guy is, and it's in character for him at that point. So yeah, I thought that I was expecting them to do it, and when they didn't, I was a little bit disappointed personally.
I thought the whole third act of this movie dragged.
I agree that there were parts of it that were weak.
This was the part of the film where I thought they weren't confident enough with what the first two acts did in terms of a female Ghostbusters movie. And now we just need to turn that dial up to 15 in terms of visual effects and cinematography. First off, all right, so all the ghosts are out in the city. That's fine. It's just like the first movie. But now it's like, what if we actually had them fight all those ghosts?
Oh, I thought that scene was actually cool. Like,
I thought it went on too long, and I thought it was confusing. Like, what? Why was there a carnival theme?
It wasn't a carnival theme. They basically just rewinded New York until like the 1930s.
I liked it personally because it allowed them to have more gadgets and stuff to do.
That bugged me though, because normally I sort of expect that thing from a superhero film, or at least a Ghostbusters television series. I did kind of think of the real Ghostbusters at sometimes, especially too because the Holtzman, she kind of looks like the cartoon version of Egon. Egon in the cartoon.
Oh yeah, a little bit.
They brought all these new gadgets in, and they spent all this time just whipping the shit out of ghosts. I mean, it could be a neat little action sequence, but I thought, is this a little too much?
I didn't think so. Like the scene where they fight ghosts really only goes on for like a good like maybe 5 minutes tops, and they had a lot of cool stuff. Like I liked the glove where they could punch the ghosts. Like I thought that was cool. And the scene where like she takes out like the Zero Suit Samus plasma whips and starts going to town. I just thought that they were having a lot of fun with it personally. I didn't feel like it. I didn't ever get the feeling that it dragged. The parts of the third act that I thought dragged were when Kristen Wiig was separated from the other Ghostbusters, which like I didn't really get what made her separated. Like, she was on the other side of town, and she just couldn't call them. Like, she didn't try calling their cell phones or something. That didn't make sense to me. And
I've heard people say that there might have been like a breakup scene that they cut, and that was sort of the remains of it, that they kept keep them separate. Like, she got frustrated because of everything going on, and she quit or something like that, and they just sort of cut that subplot out.
I hate that kind of subplot, so I'm glad that it got cut if that's the case. Because, you know, I'm not friends with you anymore, or like in a love interest thing, like when they break up, when you know they're just going to get back together. I'm usually not a fan of that. But if that's the case, they should have rewritten it a little bit more clearly, because her being separated just made no sense to me. And that's where I think the third act failed. Because, again, the best parts of this movie were when all four Ghostbusters were together. Having Kristen Wiig be separated made everything feel very off to me.
I enjoyed the final act myself, and it was interesting to see their own take on ghostbusting, because they weren't really using the trap, and the traditional trap really wasn't around except for one scene, because they don't have a containment unit yet, which makes sense. And they even had a reasoning why, like, okay, we're not really taking down the ghost in this case, we're just sort of distracting them for now, or making them incapacitated, because they're not obviously not dead. You can't get rid of them until the actual climax of the whole scene. So it actually kind of worked for me in a grand total. I think once the giant form of the Ghostbuster symbol up, that's when it started dragging a little bit for me. But I think the actual fight scene with the ghosts, I think that worked fine.
It felt like a toy commercial to me. And normally, when you think back in hindsight, they can all be construed like that. But I really felt it this time. The only reason why they had these gadgets, the vacuum, the gauntlet, the double pistols, that's just to sell toys.
Johnny, you're crazy. They don't sell action figures of women.
Oh yeah, you're right.
That makes too much sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, I personally I thought the scene was fun, so I didn't really care. And I also feel like it felt warranted, because they had the scenes in the middle of the movie where like they were learning how to how to use the equipment, and those scenes were actually really funny, but it felt like a payoff, like, okay, these people, now they know what they're doing.
They know what they're doing and then some. That's why it sort of rubbed me the wrong way.
A little bit, but I've heard from a lot, I mean, we're going to get into this subject, but might as well. I've heard from a lot of women who've seen that scene, and it's actually meant a lot to them, for, in their case, to see 4 normal women in jumpsuits, not somebody like Black Widow. We've already seen Black Widow kick ass how many times, and characters like that, do well, and it's a different kind of empowerment to see normal women in jumpsuits kick Ghost butt, and I can totally see why that would affect some women who want to see that kind of representation. And granted, the scenes might have problems. It might be a little too overblown, might be a little bit too this, but you know what? I'm willing to give them an action scene, an action beat to have it sort of come together, whether it was mishandled or like kind of sloppily handled or not. I'm willing to give it that. When it's the giant form again is my major issue with it. The ghost fighting itself, I'm fine.
I basically agree 100% with you there, Derek. Like, once they have the giant Ghostbuster symbol, I feel like things kind of fall apart there. Because again, like he's kind of like just walking around, and they're just kind of standing there for a decent amount of time. So it's not as kinetic as it was before, at the very least. But there have been a lot of pictures of like young girls in Ghostbusters costumes being really excited about the movie that I've already seen. So just giving them the opportunity to be as enthralled with this kind of stuff as young boys were when the original movie came out, I think is just good for everybody in general. So
I just thought the jump from where they started to where they ended within the same film was a little too extreme. Like, I don't think we got to that point.
Oh
yet.
yeah, because there's I think there's like a scene. Isn't there a scene with like Melissa McCarthy doing like rolling end over end or something like that, or like they doing these like crazy maneuvers in order to capture the guy, or like whipping around and whatnot.
Let's be fair here, though. Every action movie does that kind of stuff. Like, you got like the original Iron Man, for instance. You get the scene where like Tony Stark is flying around in the Iron Man suit, and the thing almost breaks. And then in the next scene where he does it, he's perfect. He's perfect at it. Every action movie does this kind of stuff.
You kind of expect that thing though with a superhero film. Would you consider Ghostbusters to be a superhero film?
It's more comedy focused for sure, but it uses a lot of the same elements. Really,
it is kind of structured like one.
It has a different focus, but it uses a lot of the same tropes, and it uses a lot of the same structure.
I'm led to believe, at least I think I'm led to believe, that these 4 women are just your common everyman. That you could be these Ghostbusters, male or female, doesn't really matter. And what I see them do in the third act is like, I don't think I can do that. Especially with untested nuclear reactors attached to my back. But again, it's just the shift. How fast we get to that point was jarring. It's not the fact that they're doing it in the first place, it's how fast we get.
Yeah, and I get that.
That besides that, the movie just sort of ends.
I felt like the ending was appropriate. Like the all of the lights with the "We Love Ghostbusters." I thought that was
heartwarming.
Yeah, that was sweet. Like, I mean, there were a couple of funny jokes at the end. Like the mayor, it's just like, you're telling me that like the water was poisoned with hallucinogens. Like, I knew that they were making fun of how sloppily they were gonna cover it up, which I thought was nice, because it makes an awful lot more sense than, again, Ghostbusters 2, where, you have a giant marshmallow walking around and people's like, no, ghosts don't exist. Oh, God, I hate that movie.
Yeah, I agree. The setup for that, I mean, I hate the setup for Ghostbusters 2 so much.
Yeah,
but
I mean, I guess if overall, like I said, I thought this was a pretty good movie. Is where I'd fall into this. Above average. I enjoyed myself. I've thought about maybe seeing it again in a matinee just so I can confirm my thoughts, because I did enjoy it that much. I thought it had a weak first act, a great second act, and a pretty good third act to make a pretty decent movie. And I think one of the key things about this film that works is that the 4 actresses have great chemistry together. They work off each other very well, and I just had a good time.
I'm gonna parrot a lot of what Derek said. Again, second act, strongest part of the movie by far. I laughed a lot. There were a handful of jokes that just straight up failed for me, which is never really a great thing in a comedy. To just have a couple of jokes that aren't just not funny, but actively unfunny. That's never good for a comedy, and there were a handful of those. And again, most of those ended up in the trailer somehow. But if you're honestly interested in seeing the movie, and you're saying that you're not going to go see it because of X, Y, or Z, I'd reconsider your thoughts on the matter and go into it with as open of a mind as possible, because you could be pleasantly surprised. Again, I think it was a pretty good movie, above average, has some flaws that I would like to see fixed in a sequel.
And here's the thing, if you want to go into this movie and hate it, it's very easy to do it. You can pick this movie apart so easily, but
Reddit has already had a field day on it, but it's also like, if you're going in there and not trying to hate it, like if you're not going in there and actively like, I am going to write the best YouTube review of this Ghostbusters movie possible. If you're going into it honestly wanting to enjoy it, or even just going into it with a completely blank slate, like I don't know what I'm going to get,
you might like it, you might not. It really is a coin flip, because I'm sure Johnny went into it that mindset as well.
It's definitely not going to be the worst movie you've ever seen, though, I think.
No, I wouldn't say it's the worst movie I've ever seen or anything like that. And yeah, it's exactly why I head into the film, is because whether or not I thought the trailers were enjoyable or not, and they weren't, the movie may be enjoyable. I may get a kick out of this, and hey, I got a new Ghostbusters film to watch. Unfortunately, it's throughout the entire film, because of all their little callbacks and similar plot structure, until the third act at the very least. I was reminded of the '84 film. I was reminded throughout the whole film, to me, was the better film. And not just because of characters, but because of the style of comedy. Again, to me, this boils down to whether or not you have a preference for this sort of comedy, or whether or not you have a preference for this sort of comedy. I loved the original '84 Ghostbusters because of, again, how dry the humor was. I loved Egon and how obsessed he was with his craft and that he had no emotion. I loved how Peter Venkman just didn't give a shit about it. Like, he was dragged into this, and he was that perfect anchor for the cynic. And Ray, he was such a dork. And I would agree with you, Ted. I think Winston had the least amount to do in that one, but I think he did a serviceable job.
I'm not trying to shit on Ernie Hudson, because he's great in the movie. It's just, in terms of the plot, he really has no arc or really any cool stuff to do.
Yeah, he's just there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But that said, I thought the female cast did their jobs well enough. I didn't think there was really a weak link in any of these characters. So in that regards, that movie's fine as the Ghostbusters. It's just the style of humor. I mean, I've seen this before. I was expecting that. Only now the jokes are different, and I just wasn't laughing as much as I thought as much as I wanted to. So that's my opinion as someone who grew up with the original films. And unfortunately, it's a crutch that I just couldn't let go of. I couldn't turn it off.
Yeah, and that's not your fault.
Cannot blame you for that at all. I completely understand that opinion. Yeah.
Actually, John, you're sexist because you didn't love this movie.
Oh, God.
The jig is up.
Actually, a legitimate question before we end this off completely. Have you guys played the Ghostbusters game that came out on PS3 and Xbox 360?
Nope. I wanted to. I have not.
I would recommend it. It does kind of feel like a Ghostbusters 3. Bill Murray obviously gives no crap about his performance in that, but it's still kind of fun to have all the original cast back and a new Ghostbuster story set in that universe, and it is pretty much a Ghostbusters 3. So I'd recommend checking it out if you're not happy with this movie, or even if you did enjoy this movie. It is worth. It's fun.
Okay, then. Well, that about wraps it up for the Ghostbusters 2016 reboot, remake, however you want to classify. What would you guys say? Remake, reboot? What do you guys
It's a reboot.
Reboot.
Yeah.
Thanks again for listening in on this movie review podcast. I want to thank Ted from BrainScratch for joining me. I want to I want to thank Derrick from GameXplain for joining me in tonight's podcast. Thanks again for joining me, guys. I appreciate your company.
No problem.
I'm going to play the Fallout Boy version of Ghostbusters while you sleep tonight.
Don't you dare. Thank you guys for listening. Have yourselves a fantastic night, and Bustin' makes me feel good. That is an actual lyric in the original Ray Parker song, which they got away with. Just want you guys to know with. want you guys to know that. Good night, everybody.